Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman. This is the Apple Mac Mini. Let's get into the review. So look, in design terms, there's really only three things worth talking about, and I want to cover them off fairly quickly. This is the Mac Mini, and it is smaller than ever before. And while that is some impressive engineering on Apple's part, I'm not sure it matters that much to most people who are going to use it, unless you're stacking these things and the smaller size really means you can just cram more of them into a cabinet or something. It's beautiful engineering, it's interesting, but it probably won't make that much difference to your day-to-day relative to the older, slightly larger Mac Mini, which I guess is the Maxi? No, that doesn't work either. Forget I said that. Then there's the power button, and obviously this is slightly contentious with some people because Apple has chosen in its wisdom to put it on the bottom of the Mac Mini. Now, is this some huge earth-shattering blunder on their part? No, not really. It's not completely inaccessible, but it's not as easy to use as it might be, and as much as some people might not like me saying this, the reality is that Macs, like any other computer, do crash from time to time. There are points where you are actually going to need to do that hard reset, where you're going to need to reach that button, and if everything's cabled up, reaching it is less convenient than it might be. I kind of get why, in terms of the internal design, they put the power button where it was, but it's still not a great piece of design. What is a great piece of design, though, and what really impresses me, what makes me very, very happy about the Mac Mini, are the ports. And it's not just the number of the ports, it's the fact that Apple has thrown a couple of them around the front. Now, of course, they did this with the Mac Studio a few years back, but I am just very, very happy to have a couple of front accessible ports. I so seriously wish that they had done this with the iMac, because again, big desktop computer, plenty of space to put ports around the front, but they haven't. That's an aesthetic call. Here, I feel like they've made a big functional call, and it's a great one. One small note on the ports, though, and this is sort of going to cross over into the performance section as well, because effectively there are, once again, two Mac Minis. There's the baseline M4 and then there's the M4 Pro variant. And it's the M4 Pro variant that Apple sent my way eventually for review. Now, if you opt for the baseline M4 version, you get 3 USB-C Thunderbolt 4 ports, while if you spend that extra, quite a bit extra in fact, for the M4 Pro variant, they're Thunderbolt 5 ports. Now, for the Pro audience, the additional throughput of those Thunderbolt 5 ports could make a lot of difference. Honestly, for most everyday users, Thunderbolt 4 is likely to be more than fast enough. And honestly, my big appreciation here is not around Thunderbolt 4 or Thunderbolt 5, it's around having more than enough ports for peripherals and connectivity front and back. Alongside USB-C and whatever flavour your Mac Mini sports, you also get Gigabit Ethernet, optionally configurable up to 10 gig Ethernet, an HDMI port, and a standard figure 8 style power input socket. Unlike an iPhone, you do get a power cable in the box, but being this standard shape, you could in fact sub in just about any other power cable of that style. Technically, I believe it's IEC C7, if you like knowing your specifications. Now, of course, the Mac Mini keeps itself small by not shipping with a keyboard, mouse, monitor, or any other peripheral, unlike the MacBooks or iMac, where they're either incorporated into the design or included in the box. I'm all in favour of this, because while I do like Apple's computer hardware, I've long thought that its keyboard and mouse trackpad peripherals, well, pretty, designed to look nice, left a lot to be desired in the functionality and durability stakes. Now, Apple's own in-house displays are another story again, but then the Studio Display or Pro Display XDR will cost you a heck of a lot more than most Mac Minis. And honestly, being able to pick and choose between peripherals to suit your style represents freedom to me, and I'm all in favour of that. The Mac Mini M4 sells in quite a few configuration variants, starting from the baseline $999 Australian Mac Mini M4 with a 10-core CPU, all the way up to a fully kitted out $7,149 Mac Mini M4 Pro with a 14-core CPU, 64GB of RAM, and 8TB of storage. And that's a huge price range to deal with. And naturally enough, that does bring with it questions around value and performance. Now, for the purpose of this review, Apple loaned me a $2,199 Mac Mini M4 Pro. That's the 12-core CPU, 16-core GPU, 24GB of RAM, and 512GB of storage model, which is essentially the entry-level M4 Pro variant. And the key detail to remember here is that, like any other Apple Silicon Mac, Everything is built on a single effective silicon blob, which means you can't pull out RAM or the hard drive to upgrade it later on, and you can't really add or modify to the GPU either. And as such, it's really important to identify your precise needs when buying a Mac Mini because they are really sealed units. And that's especially important given the rather high prices Apple puts on upgrades. To give you an example, bumping up to 64 gig of RAM, if you needed it, costs an additional $900. Or, in other words, nearly the full cost of a baseline Mac Mini M4 all over again just for RAM. So choosing carefully then becomes a question of performance. And here I'd love to be able to say that I've also been able to test the Mac Mini M4 alongside the Mac Mini M4 Pro, but sadly that's just not been the case. What I can do, however, is compare the performance of the Mac Mini M4 Pro against other Apple Silicon machines at a CPU and GPU level, including the M4 MacBook Pro. Not quite a like-for-like comparison, of course, but it's a start, and also hopefully useful to you if you're pondering a shift from a laptop MacBook to a desktop solution. So for example, here's how the Mac Mini M4 Pro compares against a range of other Apple Silicon Macs using Geekbench 6's CPU test. That M4 Pro score is pretty nice, given what you'd pay for an M3 MacBook Pro even now, and also a good jump up from the older M2 Pro Mac Mini if you're on a straight upgrade path. And that shouldn't leave the regular M4 model out in the cold either. You could expect to see broadly similar performance to what I saw from the M4 MacBook Pro. Putting a more real-world usage scenario to the test, here's how the Mac Mini M4 Pro compared using Cinebench's slightly older Cinebench R23 benchmark, which I use because I've got a bunch of older scores for comparative purposes. And look, having used the Mac Mini M4 for video rendering using Final Cut Pro X, I can attest to the fact that this is a really nice, beefy, graphics-pushing machine for sure. And that's also borne out in its performance with the newer Cinebench 2024 benchmark, although here I have fewer comparative scores to work with. On the software side, of course, this is a macOS Sequoia machine, it's pre-installed, and that does mean that you get the whole raft of Apple Intelligence features built into macOS to play with, if that's your style, not entirely mine. In terms of software upgrades, Apple never really comments on just how long they'll provide software upgrades for a given Mac, and that hasn't changed here, though working off Apple's rough scheduling around obsolete Macs suggests that you should be easily good for between 5 to 7 years of upgrades at the very least. And so with all that in mind, if you're keen on the Mac Mini, and if you're still watching, I'm presuming you are, which one should you buy? Well, here's my advice. For most everyday users, it's going to be that entry-level Mac Mini M4. If you just want an everyday Mac for web-based work, rest or play, it's almost overpowered for your needs, and at a price point that's way lower than any other current new Mac you could buy. I think there's a very good argument to be made this is Apple's absolute best value Mac. Now, sure, you do have to factor in the price of a keyboard, mouse and screen, but honestly, wouldn't take too much work to get a basic Mac Mini M4 fully set up for under, say, $1,100 even if you had nothing else, and obviously quite a bit less if you've already got some of those peripherals ready to rock. That does leave the Mac Mini M4 Pro for the pro crowd only, but here again, I think the value is fairly clear. You're not getting the full portability of a MacBook Pro, but you're not paying MacBook Pro prices for the same or a greater level of processing power, and who doesn't like saving money?